Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The Maid Falls in Love. Chapter 1. Oi, you little terror! Get back here! The child shrieked with delight, and Maggie nearly tripped over the front of her dress and pursued out the nursery door and down the hallway. Thomas ran in total glee, his little shirt sleeves flapping along behind him. Maggie had only been able to button him up partway before he'd made his escape. The little devil didn't even reach the top of the stairs before she dipped down and caught him, swinging him up into her arms and whirling him about. The child burst into a fit of noisy, open-mouthed giggles as he wriggled uselessly, Maggie laughing along with him, the sound echoing down the second-floor corridor. "Good heavens," came a severe voice. "Miss Margaret. What is all the racket? Oh dear." Maggie froze at the top of the landing, Thomas's head lolling over her forearm, her other hand hooked under his fat little thigh. Miss Helen." Maggie swallowed, staring at the old, bent woman ascending the spiral staircase toward them, one gnarled hand lifting her black skirts, the other gripping the polished wood banister as if trying to choke the life out of it. The woman fixed Maggie with a sour look. "You were tasked with dressing the young master, not playing with him. Mistress Lydia is nearly ready, and you were told to make the child presentable." No matter how often she scrutinized her work, Maggie always felt Helen's words cutting her to the core. She'd been at the Jeffries estate long enough to be a permanent part of the staff, nearing a year and a half, and yet it still felt like her first week. "But Auntie Helen," Thomas whined, still partially hanging upside down in Maggie's arms, "I don't want to." Helen Paul, while not blood-related, had been the Jeffries family housekeeper since Lady Lydia herself had been a child. Maggie, though maybe over the years, all the bitterness had pickled the old woman. She'd likely live forever. Unfortunately. "I'm sorry ma'am," Maggie said, crouching down to set Thomas back on his feet. "The little lad and I were just having a wee bit of fun. I don't rightly know what heathen rabble counted for fun back wherever you came from, but you've been off the boat long enough to have civilized yourself to some degree." Helen looked down her hooked nose in Maggie's direction, like a black-ruffled vulture. "I should hope so, in any event." She sniffed. "Now come along Master Thomas, I should see that you're made up properly." "But now, child." Thomas wiped his nose, blinking with a cowed face up at Maggie before following dutifully back down the hallway. Maggie watched him totter along, considerably more deflated than he had been. They turned the corner, leaving her standing idly at the top of the stairs. Splendid, she thought ruefully, smoothing down the front of her dress. What was she supposed to do now? It was like Helen purposefully dismissed her so she'd be seen wandering haplessly about the grounds. She took the servants' staircase, a cramped little companionway winding down to the first floor. It emptied her out onto the side of the house and through an unassuming doorway, concealed by immense shrubbery. Maggie could smell baking bread wafting on the air. She could head to the kitchens, help Alice with preparations for supper, although Maggie couldn't really call herself a good cook by any standard. She could wash the dishes. If she didn't find something to busy herself with soon, it was likely Bess would spot her, and she'd be roped into cleaning the family's personal chambers. And the household privies. Maggie pulled a face. Scullery it was. Lost in her thoughts, she rounded the corner to the sunny side of the manor, but not before a pair of arms wrapped round her middle from behind and pulled her back into the shadows. She nearly yelped in fright, but as the assailant whirled her around, she was met with a richly made double-breasted vest and a mischievous grin. "Oh!" she gasped, unruly red curls swinging down into her face. Brandon. The Jeffries' eldest son. She blushed, fussing her hair back. Not a cruel young man by any means, he was one of those boys with a carefree streak of mischief. He always reminded her of a neighbor boy from her youth, who'd pull pranks on unsuspecting girls and would hold her hand as they splashed in the mud on rainy afternoons. At her startled expression, Brandon laughed, his broad shoulders shaking and his kind brown eyes squinted down at her. "You were so much in your own little world that you didn't even see me." His arm was still loose around her middle. "You've got to be more careful, walking around with your head in the clouds. What if I were some scoundrel waiting to kidnap you?" "A scoundrel you very well may be, but I doubt you'd get a penny's worth of ransom from kidnapping me of all people. And besides," she huffed, winded from embarrassment and the sudden shock, "I've got somewhere to be." "Aren't you supposed to be at your big fancy office down in town right about now? It's the middle of the day, for goodness sakes. Some of us have to work for a living, you know." His sandy blonde brows pulled together. "Now that's a fine way to say you've missed me, Maggie. Besides, you know I'm work." Being a freshly minted associate meant he kept long hours, even slept at the law office some nights, but he still returned every week to his family home not far from town. Sometimes, Maggie would fantasize he came back just for her. "Well, of course, I missed you," she said exasperatedly. "Only one I've got to talk to is Alice when you're not round." Most of the staff was much older. "It's either that or Miss Helen, and she don't come across as liking me very much." Brandon quirked his lips to the side. "Bah, that old crone," he said. "She yelled at me plenty of times when I was a boy. She's just jealous over all that pretty red hair of yours." One of his hands came up to push away more bouncy curls, his voice going low. "And of your charming accent." Maggie hummed, eyes fluttering closed at the feel of his fingertips against the smooth skin of her neck. It was dangerous every time they were like this, flirting and close. If she were smart, Maggie told herself, she would have spurned his friendship long ago. But he was so kind, especially when the rest of the house had been so indifferent upon her arrival. Over the first year of her employment, during his traveling back and forth from university, they'd enjoyed a rapidly deepening rapport. He always listened to her aches and pains with a sympathetic ear, and her stories from back home with intent fascination. And his tales of his escapades at school never failed to lift her spirits. And the thought of him interested in her, the wealthy son of her proprietors, well, it was rather thrilling. Recently, she thought he'd looked about to kiss her, and she wasn't so sure if she'd stop him. "So," she said, finally batting his hand away, "you go and tell me why you've been skulking round out here?" He grinned, leaning in and cupping his hand as if he were about to tell a secret. Maggie tilted her head, and when he spoke into the shell of her ear, his warm, mischievous tone made a thrill run down her spine. His hand upon the small of her back pressed her in closer. "I'm hiding." Maggie whispered back, "Hiding? Whomever from?" "Mother," he said, pulling away with an overindulgent pout. It made him look far younger than his 20-some years. More like his brother. Maggie giggled. "She's trying to drag poor Thomas and me over to Elm Street. Something about tea and croquet," he added with an exasperated expression. "Can't think of anything more monstrously boring. Ah, the Montgomery's place. That's why he was back so early in the day." Like a pinprick to a soap bubble, her cheery mood burst. "That's where that fine Emma girl lives, is it?" Maggie tried to hide her acute disappointment. Mrs. Jeffries had been setting up convenient little get-togethers for the better part of a month now. Maggie sighed. "Now that's a girl you could ransom for a hefty price. She's the most boring young woman I've ever had the misfortune of meeting. No doubt she'll go on and on about needlepoint for the better part of the afternoon. I'd much rather listen your stories." Maggie shrugged, smiling, but non-committal. She'd already told him the best parts, the good parts. Memories of simple farm life. He didn't need to know about the hunger, the cholera, the typhus, the death, the kinds of things undoubtedly foreign to that well-bred Emma girl with her dainty lace ruffles and uncalloused hands. "You should go," she told him, leaning out of his embrace. After all, she was just a distraction, fun and fleeting. They were a daydream, the two of them. He had real opportunities, and she was a mere servant girl. A maid who couldn't read well and who couldn't cook. He was obviously hurt, but released her anyway. "It'll please your ma dearly if you go," Maggie urged, forcing herself to rein in her feelings. Although every time she pulled away, it was like a little piece of her went along with him. He nodded slowly. "I'll be back this evening." Maggie smiled, but it felt tired. "You best run along, or Miss Helen will be screeching for you, and my poor ears can't take her a minute more of her yowling." She shooed him with a hand, turning to leave him standing amidst the shrubs with a look she couldn't, or didn't, want to place. For the rest of the afternoon, she took out her frustration on the pots and pans in Alice's kitchen, and that evening, after Mrs. Jeffries and the boys returned home and when her husband joined them after his work for dinner, Maggie took her place with the other staff to serve the family supper. As always, Miss Helen watched the staff with hawk-like scrutiny. Brandon tried to catch her eye from across the table as she set Thomas's meal down before him, but Maggie resisted the temptation to glance back his way. It would sour his mood, and for that she felt awful. "Emma and her mother are doing well, wouldn't you say, Brandon?" Mrs. Jeffries remarked, cutting into her chicken with dainty precision. Her eldest son grunted down at his plate. "She's quite accomplished," the woman added to her husband, a barrel-chested man with bushy mustache and flushed complexion. "She's boring. And she's got a pig nose." "Mother," he added, like the formality would lessen the tenor of his words. Little Thomas covered his mouth to giggle, and even Mr. Jeffries chortled into his wine glass. Lydia looked less than amused, her fork coming to rest rather loudly against the fine china plate. "She's a well-to-do young lady of suitable age. Tell him," she implored her husband, "tell your son. Now that he's secured a promising place at the firm, it is time he starts thinking about a family." Mr. Jeffries's mustache twitched. "Bah, he's young yet. Let him pick wildflowers for a little while longer, eh?" Mrs. Jeffries went pink with indignation. "Henry." The man covered his grin with a few well-timed coughs. "Brandon, your mother's right, of course." He tried again, more serious. "You need to start thinking about your future, boy. As long as this girl's from a respectable family, what does it matter if she doesn't look the part? Appearance isn't everything." Mrs. Jeffries made a strangled sort of nose. "It certainly helps, though," he added quickly. Brandon's lowered his eyes to his place, but they flicked up and caught Maggie's eye, who was standing with her back to the wall with the other servers. She tried to keep her face impassive. Chapter 2. I'm plumb exhausted." Back in the kitchens, Maggie was helping Alice tidy up the staff table after their own dinner before heading off to the adjacent servants' quarters. Quite a long day, Maggie agreed, head still buzzing over the conversation she and Brandon had earlier. "Everything all right?" Alice asked. Maggie turned to see the older woman looking at her intently, even as she untied and hung up her apron. "You've been very quiet this evening. And you were scouring like a right terror earlier, too." Maggie flushed. "I'm fine, really. Just thinking about my place here is all." She tucked a lock of hair back in place. "Helen doesn't seem to be making my life any easier, and, well, I'd like this place to feel like home." "Oh, my dear," Alice laid a comforting hand upon her arm. "That's just Helen's way. I've been here nearly a decade, and she's not too friendly to me either." The woman chuckled. "And Thomas likes you, that's plain to see. Now why don't you head out and wash up? I'll take care of the rest here." Maggie nodded, her eyes trained down. She removed her apron before exiting out the kitchen's back door onto the patio. The servants' quarters were a few yards away from the main building, across the lawn, in a long, low-roofed row building of shared rooms. They didn't have attached water closets like the family did. Maggie would have to draw cold water from the hand pump for her wash basin. A few paces on, a rustling noise made her pause. She went quiet, frozen in place as she strained her ears. "Psst, hey." Maggie turned to squint in the direction of the voice, out into the dark. She crept closer to the edge of the patio where there was a waning ring of light cast from the kitchen windows. As her eyes adjusted, she could see someone peeking out from behind one of the tall garden urns. "Be Brandon," he whispered. He beckoned to her. "What are you?" The door to the kitchen swung open, spilling even more light into the yard. Maggie hurried into the shadows before Alice came out and saw her. "That was a close one," he whispered as she took his hand, allowing him to pull her out of sight. They both crouched down behind the shrubs and flower boxes, watching Alice cross the patio toward the servants' quarters. When she was gone, he stood back up, bringing Maggie along with him. "What on earth are you doing out here?" she said at long last, once she was sure they wouldn't be heard. He dazzled her with a grin, leaning up against the stone base of a topiary planter. "Waiting for you, of course." His expression grew serious. "You didn't look like yourself this evening." "I was worried." She was taken aback. Worried about her? Didn't he have any sense at all? This little acquaintance they had going, didn't he know it could ruin him? "You can't be seen out here," she hissed. "What if she finds out?" Brandon's lips parted in surprise. "She? Your mother? Or Emma Montgomery? Or whoever you're supposed to be looking to marry?" He made a face. "I'm not looking to marry her." Maggie gripped the front of her skirt. "That's hardly the point." "Is that what you were worried about?" He straightened up. "That I'd be lulled into marriage by the listless musings of some dull, spoiled socialite?" "Maybe not her, but your ma is right," Maggie tried again. "You're a successful young man with a good education. You're kind, polite, wonderful with little Thomas." As she spoke, his expression slowly changed. "You're a hard worker, no one could fault you for that, but you're not one of those uptight kinds that people have to nag on to take their supper. Thoughtful, certainly handsome, although a bit of a troublemaker, I'll give you that." What are you looking at me like that for?" Brandon was grinning. He reached out to her whispering, "Didn't know you thought so much of me." He pulled her into a tight hug. Maggie flushed, glad for the dark. "It's true," she said, her voice muffled by his shoulder. "Any of those ladies would be lucky to have you." "Well, I don't want to marry any of those ladies, Maggie." His voice came from somewhere near the top of her head. A thrill shot through her, right down into her toes. She felt a bit dazed. "You don't?" He pulled her back so he could see her. It was the first time she'd ever noticed an ounce of shyness in him. "I want to marry you." Before she could find her wits enough to reply, he cupped her chin with his hand, bent down his head, and kissed her. It was so sudden, Maggie held onto the front of his vest for dear life, even after she ran out of air and had to pull away. She raked in a breath. That. Brandon's eyes crinkled with mirth. "Are you trying to say you don't want to marry me?" No, the words almost surprised her as much as they did him. "I'm not saying that at all. It's just," she laughed, breathless, pressing the heel of her palm to her forehead. "I can't marry you." "Why not?" "Because I'm a successful young businessman, you said it yourself." His arms tightened around her. "I can choose to marry whomever I please. And I want to marry you. Margaret, I enjoy spending time with you more than any of those other girls I am forced to entertain. You're sharp as a whip, you're gentle but firm when you need to be, and you make me laugh. Don't you understand? I don't care what Mother says about it, I love you, Maggie." Maggie covered her mouth, about to cry. "And I'm asking you, please, to be my wife." Maggie sniffed in a muffled sob, nodding vigorously. Brandon let out a triumphant growl, gathering her up in his arms again. "You make me so happy, Maggie. I love you." Finally, she found her voice. "I love you, too." Chapter 3. Although Brandon had to leave most of the week for work, he always made it a point to seek Maggie out before heading back into the city. Not that he was very tactful about it, which made her a bit nervous. More than once, Alice caught him loitering outside back of the kitchens in his very fine suit. He would make up some odd excuse to get one of the other housemaids to go and fetch her. On one of the more recent occasions, Alice gave her a rather disapproving look, but didn't say a word. "I'll miss you terribly," he said one morning, before heading out on a rather long trip to a conference the next state over. He was to be gone for nearly a month. Brandon kissed each of her fingertips with delicate reverence. "I wish I could take you with me." She wrinkled her nose, standing up on the balls of her feet to lean in close. "You're lucky I'm not going. You wouldn't be able to keep your mind on your work." They were standing together behind the carriage house, and Maggie hoped Helen wouldn't notice that she was taking an awful long time to gather the washing. He reached into the front pocket of his vest. "I have something for you." "You do?" Maggie watched with delicious anticipation as he took out a small folded cloth and pressed it into her hand. "What is it?" He chuckled. "So many questions." "Just open it, for goodness sakes." Maggie's breath caught as she folded away the silky fabric, exposing a small gold ring adorned with a cluster of pearls strung upon a thin, gold chain. "Oh my. It was my grandmother's." Brandon grinned, looking a bit flush. "I want you to have it. It's beautiful. I know you can't wear it on your finger," he went on, plucking the ring up by the chain. "So, I thought you could wear it as a necklace for a while." She turned so he could lay it around her neck, fastening the delicate clasp. The weight of it made his promise seem all the more real. For the rest of the day, once Brandon had set off, Maggie helped Bess with her cleaning. They started out in Mr. Jeffries' study, Maggie going for the windows first, and then attacking the wood desk with a bit of polish. Bess stood up from the scrubbing the floor, her hand on her back. "All's left is to dust the books if you can take care of it." Maggie looked over her shoulder. "Course I can." Bess nodded, gathering her bucket of supplies. "I'll go ahead and start on the next room then." Finishing with the desk, Maggie picked up the feather duster and stood on her tiptoes to reach the uppermost shelf first. As she worked, she let her mind wander and her eyes roam over the wide array of books. Some of them were so beautiful, with gold, embossed script and loopy typeset. She knew a few of the letters. If she struggled over words long enough, she could muddle her way through a few sentences, she was sure. All the other girls Brandon had met, the ones in their fancy houses with their own personal tutors, they could read all right. Some of them could probably read French, and there she was, barely able to make sense of the titles in English. If only she had a way to practice. She imagined herself done up in one of Mrs. Jeffries' beautiful gowns, reading to a boisterous red-headed child with wide, brown eyes. The thought stirred a deep longing within her. Absently, she pressed the ring against her breast. Maybe Brandon was right. Maybe he could marry whomever he wanted. Didn't that mean she should be trying to make herself into a woman worthy of such a marriage? Knowing it was strictly against the rules to take anything from the Jeffries house, she slid a small book down from the shelf, glancing over its cover. Something about shorter stories. She slipped the book into her blouse, rearranging the other tomes to fill the empty space. A thrill of fear washed through her, but Maggie reminded herself that she wasn't stealing it. She had every intention of putting it back after she studied it. If she could make herself a more learned, a more desirable young lady, perhaps she could really marry Brandon. Sharply approaching footsteps made her whirl around, just as Helen came into view, framed in the study doorway. "Miss Margaret," she folded her arms over her chest. "Working hard today, are we?" Maggie swallowed, hoping the other woman couldn't see her pulse racing. Oh, yes," she replied. Helen pressed her lips together, her eyes narrow. Maggie motioned to the bookcase. "Almost finished in here." Very good." During the remainder of her chores, the book felt as if it were burning a hole through Maggie's clothing. Surely, everyone could tell it was hidden there. After Helen's interrogation, she'd almost lost her nerve, but bolstered by the promise hanging around her neck, Maggie feigned a sour stomach at the end of the Jeffries' dinner to avoid dish duty, and retired to her room before any of the other women were finished. There, huddled on a small, wooden stool and illuminated by a short, flickering candle, she cracked open the cover. It was a bit disheartening. She couldn't even finish the first paragraph before she heard the other women outside. She snapped the book closed, stuffing it between the folds of her spare dress under the bed. It would be a rather slow and painful go at it, but still, it was a start. That night, under the coarse wool blanket and amidst the sounds of Alice's light snoring, Maggie slipped the ring idly on and off her finger, unable to sleep. Honing her reading skills wouldn't be enough to convince high society she was worthy. She had to look like a lady, act like a lady. She never took much notice to the way Mrs. Jeffries carried herself. She was usually too busy with the other housework to take the time. Not anymore, Maggie thought. She'd have to be extra vigilant in observing the women, and commit every little nuance to her memory. As they served the family dinner the next night, Maggie snuck sly glances at Lydia, watching the way she took small, graceful steps through the parlor, how she kept her arms positioned just so, and the dainty way she pressed the linen napkin to the corners of her mouth after each little bite. Behind her back, where her arms were clasped in polite attention, Maggie mimicked the nimble-fingered way the woman cut her food, delicately setting her fork down with one hand, only to pick it up with the other before spearing the meat. So many extra steps, Maggie thought with exasperation. How was she supposed to be able to remember all that? Miss Margaret. Maggie jumped, turning to Helen, who must have spoken her name more than once to get her attention. Yes, ma'am. Good Lord, child, are you deaf? No, ma'am. Then fill the table's glasses. Helen's nostrils flared. If it pleases you to do so, of course. Maggie went scarlet, but she moved to grab the pitcher off the serving tray. She could feel Helen's gaze boring into her back. Everything came crashing down one morning a week later, when Maggie was changing sheets in Thomas's room. There came a sharp rapping at the open door, causing her to turn. To her surprise, it was Mr. Jeffries. Good morning, sir. He cleared his throat. Would you come downstairs for a moment? She stood up, tucking in the final corner of the sheet. Of course, she said, trying to hide the confusion in her voice. She followed him down the hall and down the staircase, and her heart dropped when she descended into the foyer. There, in the sitting room, was Mrs. Jeffries and Helen. They both turned around to look at her, and in Helen's sharp claw was Mr. Jeffries' book of short stories. It felt like someone had forcibly punched all the air out of her. Oh. Both women looked stern. Helen said she found this under your bed, Mrs. Jeffries accused, pointing at the book in the old woman's hand. You went through my things? Helen scoffed. You were caught stealing, and that's the first thing you say? I was not stealing. From behind her, Mr. Jeffries said in a stern voice, then why did you have it? Maggie bit her lip, looking between the three imploringly. I was just trying to learn a bit. Practicing my words is all. Mrs. Jeffries made a noise of disbelief. What's a girl like you need to learn to read for? She tittered a laugh. You don't need to read to know how to do what you're told. It almost came out right then. It almost bubbled its way up from deep inside her heart and out her mouth. It's because of Brandon. It's because he wants to marry me. She held her tongue. You should know, too, Helen said with a triumphant glint in her eye, that your son has been seen spending quite a bit of time in Miss Margaret's company. Mrs. Jeffries' head snapped around toward the old woman. Brandon. She rounded her gaze on Maggie. Whatever for? Isn't it obvious? Helen took a step toward where Maggie was frozen in terror. She's seducing him. No, Maggie breathed. She's charming him so she can rob you both blind and then scurry on back to the hole she crawled out of. Maggie took a step back. That's not true. Why are you doing this? You can't trust girls like that. Helen pointed a finger in face. She'll lie, and she'll cheat, and she'll ruin your son's chances of find a good, respectable wife. No. Maggie cried. The room went quiet, all eyes on her. I would never do that to Brandon. Her heart was beating so hard, so fast. Her hand came up to press the ring concealed under her collar. I couldn't. Because I love him. Mrs. Jeffries gasped so fast and so sharp, it almost sounded like a scream. She jumped up from her chair. Unacceptable. Watching, Helen wore a delicious expression of triumph. Unacceptable. You are out, young lady. Maggie gaped. What? You are seducing my son, and I won't have it. I'm not. Henry. Get this tramp out of my house. Get her off the property. Immediately. Before she tarnishes Brandon's reputation any further. She advanced on Maggie, who retreated, only to bump into Mr. Jeffries's hulking form at the bottom of the stairs. I'll make sure all the ladies know what kind of woman you are, Miss Margaret. You'll never work for any of the families out here ever again. Tears ran down Maggie's cheeks. I'm sorry, she babbled, even as Mr. Jeffries took her by the arm. I'm sorry. Please don't make me go. Please. But Lydia would hear none of it. We'll pay your earned wages, and then we'll be done with you. You'll leave after that. She waved her hand dismissively in the air. Mr. Jeffries led her out toward the back of the house, and over Lydia's shoulder, Maggie could see a wicked smile on Helen's old, pinched face. Chapter 4. They all came out to watch, the whole staff, even down to the stable boy, as Mr. Jeffries escorted Maggie down the long front drive and out onto the road. He'd even stood at the door to her room and watched her pack as she shoved what little she owned into a small frayed carpet bag. Please, she tried, tracks of tears drying on her face. Where will I go? Mr. Jeffries frowned at her, and after a moment, he let out a sigh. You've been a good worker these last years, Maggie, but I can't have you taking things that don't belong to you. But I... He held up his hand, cutting her off. Even if it's as you say, it's not possible for us to trust you now. She felt miserable. But what about Brandon? At that, Mr. Jeffries did look a bit sympathetic. Look here, he said, if you really do care for him, then you'll let him be. He's got a bright future ahead of him, and he can't be consorting with servant girls and keep his good reputation. Alas, she knew it was true, even if she didn't want to admit it. I'm sorry you'll be leaving us under such circumstances, he added, but it's certainly better it came out now than later, Here. He fished into the lining of his coat, extracting his pocketbook. I've heard about a great deal of women who found their fortune out west. They have these ads, you know, in the paper, men looking for a good wife. He pushed a few crisp banknotes into her hand, more than he owed her. Maggie stared down at the money, distraught. Ads for a wife? The printer's down on Main. You'll be able to start fresh. Out west. It would be weeks of travel away from the manor. What choice did she have? Maggie nodded, fresh tears stinging her eyes. Good luck. He patted her on the shoulder, turning around to walk back down the long dirt drive to the house. Maggie watched him go. Maybe he was right, she thought. If Lydia Jeffries was determined to destroy her reputation, no family with the money to hire a maid would choose her. She was ruined in this town. Absolutely ruined. She had nowhere to go. At least with a husband, she'd have food on her plate and a roof over her head. It was her only option now. She had to leave this behind. She had to get away. Hoisting her bag higher on her shoulder, she started off toward town. Maggie arrived at the printer's by mid-afternoon, hot and sweaty under her long dress. Her feet ached in her shoes, and her shoulder was sore and raw from the strap of her carpetbag. Despite her disheveled appearance, people on the street paid her little mind. She was just another lonely figure weaving in and out of citygoers. The man behind the front desk looked up in surprise as Maggie nearly fell through the door. Miss? He stood partially from his chair. Are you all right? Maggie swallowed, her throat dry, and pushed back wet curls that had stuck to her forehead. I was told you find me a husband. He looked momentarily confused. A husband? Oh. You're looking to be a mail-order bride, are you? Her shoulders slumped. Suppose I am. Well. He reached under his desk and extracted a folded-up newspaper, sliding it over to her. You can read some of the ads yourself. Pick out the ones you like, and we'll send your reply. Might be a few weeks before you get a response. At that time. A few weeks. I don't have the money to wait around here for a few weeks. I need something now. The man scoffed. Well, that just ain't gonna happen, miss. Oi. A young man sitting at a nearby drafting table looked up, obviously having been eavesdropping. He leaned in conspiratorially, whispering, "What about that one from yesterday? That lady who was heading to Colorado. We haven't sent out her letter yet." "Ah, you might be on to something there. We had this young woman break her contract yesterday. Something about a family issue, I couldn't exactly tell. We were planning on sending her apology letter back to the man she'd initially accepted, but it wouldn't be exactly ethical to." "Please," Maggie extracted the wadded-up banknotes and dropped a couple onto the desk. "I'll take her place. I'll pay you." The man rubbed one of the notes between his thumb and forefinger. "Man's gonna be in a right sour mood when he finds out you're not the woman he sent for. I'll make a good impression." He chuckled, fishing through his desk for a pair of letters, handing them to her even as he pulled the money on the desk closer to him. "Don't you go around telling people about this," he said in a whisper. "We don't normally work this way, but you look a mite bit desperate." She nodded. "There should be a train ticket in there for you. She was supposed to set out yesterday, so you'll be a bit behind. I'll go to the station immediately." "Goodness woman, you're in an awful hurry to leave town." Maggie gave the man a pinched smile but didn't reply. She was already in enough pain with the thought of never seeing Brandon again. She took the ticket and the letters, holding them tight as if they'd disappear otherwise. She could do this, Maggie told herself, as she waited on the platform for the next train, learning from the man's letter that her destination would be Rose Valley, Colorado. She could start over, where no one knew her, she thought, handing her ticket the conductor and squeezing herself into the overcrowded train car. She wouldn't be some faceless servant anymore. She wouldn't take orders from an old, wicked crone who sought new, ingenious ways for her to fail. She'd be a proper woman. She'd be someone's wife. She'd. Under her clothes, Brandon's ring still hung on its tiny gold chain, and as the train rumbled along its tracks taking her farther and farther away from the city, tears began to roll silently down her cheeks. Maggie wept, until her energy was spent and exhaustion rolled over her like a wave. Wedged in next to the window with her heavy bag on her lap, she fell into a wearied sleep. The journey to Colorado was long, but not terrible. Not so terrible, Maggie supposed, as the passage she had taken across the vast Atlantic Ocean. For one, there was no seasickness. And for another, the train did stop from time to time, letting passengers exit onto the platform to stretch their legs and to buy nibbles from food carts. It certainly was hot though, especially with the sheer number of bodies packed into the coach car. Apparently, her future husband had decided to buy her the cheapest ticket available. He must not be as wealthy as the Jeffries, she thought, or perhaps he was simply frugal. Thinking of such things made her heart ache. She remembered Brandon and his richly adored carriage and his finely tailored suites. Not that it had been the riches she had longed for. Well, the idea of being a well-off woman was rather enticing, but it was the man and his warm smile and his easy laugh that had captured her heart. After more than a week, Maggie felt that she could peel the dirt from her body in strips if she tried. She had little money left, and forewent a meal or two in order to be able to afford boarding upon her arrival. It was a delight to finally be off the train for good. She nearly leapt over the other passengers once they'd reached the Rose Valley station. The air felt crisper than in the city she'd left behind. Fresher. To her delight, as she descended the stairs of the train station, she saw the town was rather substantial, with a good bustling thoroughfare and wide, dusty streets. It didn't look too bad, she thought. Extracting the initial letter the newspaperman had given her, a letter from one Mr. Arthur Coleman to one Miss Kitty Milling, she read over the instructions and directions toward the Coleman residence. She was a bit surprised to find that, upon her arrival, it wasn't a house that she'd walked up to, but a little shop. The words tobacco, cigars, snuff were painted in gold and black on front window. Wrinkling her nose, she stepped inside. Behind the counter, a plump, dark-haired woman was reading a paper, cheek tucked into her palm where her arm rested on the table, scrunching her face. As the tinny bell above the door tinkled, she spoke without bothering to look up. "Welcome to Coleman's Tobacco," she droned, sounding bored. "Proprietors of the widest variety of all your desired smokables west of." The woman glanced over then, blinking bleary-eyed. "Huh. I'm looking for Arthur Coleman." Maggie glanced around at the rows and rows of loose tobacco. "Does he live here?" She laughed, like a small dog barking. "Who? Archie?" "Sure, he does." "Hey, Archie." Maggie jumped at the woman's sudden, shrill shriek. "What?" came a muffled reply, somewhere beyond a door at the other end of the shop. "Someone's here to see ya." "Well, tell them I'll pay them tomorrow." Maggie's mouth opened in surprise. The woman rolled her eyes. "It's a lady, Archie." The door to the back creaked open, and out strolled a squat man, a little rounder than the woman behind the counter, with patchy stubble and a receding hairline. The man, presumably Arthur Coleman, scratched his stomach absently as he approached. "Yeah?" His heavy-lidded eyes appraised Maggie with some skepticism. She noticed he had a wad of chew stuffed inside his lip. "Who are you?" Maggie tried to get the words out, but he beat her to it. He grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "You're that lady who answered my ad, aren't ya? Beatrice, or Leona." He snapped his fingers. "Lizzie." "Was it Lizzie?" "Maggie O'Shea," she said, with little humor. "Yeah," he mused, "yeah, that's right." Maggie had to restrain herself from making an underhanded noise of disbelief. "Well," he said, motioning to the woman behind the counter, "that there's Vera. She's my sister. Pleasure to meet ya." Vera stuck her hand out over the counter, which Maggie shook with forced politeness. "We run this little shop. Ain't it grand?" "'Tis very nice," Maggie said, although it absolutely reeked. You both work here?" Vera nodded. "My husband Noah's usually about, but he's gone to fetch us our new shipment. He done took our boy along with him. Little Max is such a treasure. You'll absolutely love him. I'm sure." Maggie smiled. She turned her attention back to Arthur. "So, you live here with your sister and her husband, then?" She hadn't meant for it to come out like an accusation, although neither of the two seemed sharp enough to recognize her tone. "He's just down on his luck is all," Vera tittered. "That's why he needs a good woman to take care of him. Lord knows our mama's dead, and I can't be doin' it no more." "That's right," Arthur chortled, rolling the chew against the front of his teeth. Heaven help me, Maggie thought. "Well," she said, "it's been a long day. I should come around tomorrow to discuss our plans." Arthur huffed. "What, you ain't stayin' here?" "I hardly think that'd be proper." Vera snorted into her hand. "Listen to her. She sounds like a stuffy old lady, don't she?" Maggie stared. By the Jeffries standards, she barely had command of proper English, but here, maybe she did sound a bit well-to-do. Arthur clapped his hands together. "Haha. That's a good one, Vera." "I'll stop by tomorrow," Maggie reiterated, bidding the duo good day. At the boarding house that evening, Maggie forked over the money for her room and partial board. She paid extra for a small basin of hot water, just so she could sponge off the grime that had collected on her person. Washed and changed into her nightgown, she sank down onto the scratchy cot with a soul-heavy sigh. Curling up under the heavy blanket, she extracted Brandon's ring, turning it over and over in her fingers. Would he forgive her for going through with this? "I'm sorry," she whispered, as if the ring could carry her words back to him. She stroked the pad of her thumb over the little pearls in the setting. She had no choice, she reminded herself. Lydia Jeffries had given her no choice. Closing her eyes, Maggie pictured Brandon's face, imagining his voice lulling her to sleep. She could do this. She had to. Chapter 5. Over the next week, Maggie tried her best, struggled really, to enjoy Arthur Coleman's company. She was no stranger to work. Cleaning the shop and the upstairs living quarters wasn't a difficult task, but the Colemans' arrangement was strange. She'd met Noah, Vera's husband, a thick-necked man with small, beady eyes. He was the stoic sort, barely saying 2 words to her since her arrival, absent most of the time out gathering supplies for the shop and making business deals. Vera would run the counter, impressing Maggie with her ability to know each customer's name and private life with impeccable memory. While a rather crass and gratingly shrill girl, one that would have driven Helen to an early grave, she was cordial enough. It was Arthur who perplexed her. He stocked the shelves regularly but did little else. It was their parents' business, his and Vera's, and they'd been left the deed jointly when their mother and father had died. Overall, the man seemed to have little drive to actively participate in the family business. That worried her. Did he expect her to cook and clean and help make them money on top of all that? She assumed they'd move out from above the shop, but how could they afford a place of their own if he sat on his backside all day? While she fretted, Arthur lounged on the back porch, spitting chew out into the dirt. He had a habit of calling orders out to Maggie through the propped-open door. "Did you scrub the kitchen yet?" He barked from his rocking chair. "It's been a mess since yesterday." Maggie bit her tongue, swallowing down a fiery retort. Finishing her duties, she decided that maybe she could make a connection if she tried hard enough. "Done already?" Arthur grunted as she slipped out the back door and onto the porch. "What do you want?" Maggie pulled one of the little stools over, sitting down across from the man. "I thought we could talk," she said, folding her hands in her lap. "Yeah? About what?" "Well, I think we should get to know each other before we're to be married, don't you?" Arthur spit an arc over the end of the porch and into the dirt. "Don't really see why it matters anyhow." Patience, Maggie told herself. She remembered how eager Brandon had been to hear her stories, and her throat tightened. "At least, tell me why you put the advert out in the first place." Why?" "Well, it's like Vera said, innit? A businessman such as myself should have a wife. Ain't got mama here no more, and Vera's taking care of her own, as it were." Maggie laughed, a bit confused. "So that's it then? Just someone to take care of you? Ain't that what a wife is for?" "Well, I suppose, but that doesn't mean we can't be friendly." "Whatever you say," he muttered dismissively. Wasn't really looking for all that nonsense. She didn't get much farther after that. "Well," she said finally, standing back up, "I'm off for the evening." She'd clean not only Arthur's room but the boy Max's, too. Hadn't she relished in the idea of no longer being another family's maid? "You're leaving again?" Arthur swiveled in his chair, squinting up at her from his slouched position. "Don't you think as my wife you should be, stayin' here or something?" Maggie pressed her lips into a thin smile. "I'm not quite your wife yet, am I?" "Well, funny you should bring that up." He eased up to his feet with a groan. "I been talkin' to the preacher 'bout that." He looked pleased with himself. "What do you think about the end of the week?" "I know the pastor. He can do the whole thing on the cheap." "Well, that just sounds splendid." "Sunday, it is then." "Hey Vera." "Yes, Vera called back from across the shop. "We got ourselves a wedding." A week's journey away, Brandon's coach clattered to a stop near the stables outside the manor. He swung over the rail and down to the ground, forgoing the footstool. The valet helped him with his bags. "Brandon." His mother's voice made him turn, and to his chagrin, Emma Montgomery was standing at her side under the manor's front veranda. Lydia waved her gloved hand in his direction, beckoning him over. Striding up the front steps, he allowed Emma a small smile out of courtesy before turning his attention back to the older woman. "Hello, Mother." "Oh, my dear." Lydia embraced her son. How was your journey? You look exhausted. It was a long way, he admitted, shrugging out of his coat and folding it over his forearm. He glanced over his mother's shoulder. Where's Thomas? Helen put him down for a nap. And father? In the sitting room, my love. Brandon craned his neck, peering in through the parlor windows. Where's Miss Maggie? A sour shadow passed over his mother's face. Darling, Emma is here to see you. She motioned for the young woman to come forward. Isn't that nice? The girl took a step forward, her hands clasped as she blinked demurely up at him. It's a pleasure to see you again, Brandon. He hummed, distracted, continuing to crane his neck over both of their heads. Where did you say she was? His mother's smile was tight. Whoever do you mean, Brandon? He frowned, feeling off-kilter. Margaret. Of course, hung on the end. Had they forgotten so quickly? Lydia was still smiling, but it was a strained kind of expression, more of a grimace than anything else. Oh, she spoke through a tight jaw. You certainly don't have to fuss about the household help. Goodness, that's my responsibility. I can't imagine why you'd even inquire. Miss Margaret is gone, my dear. But she's already been replaced. Brandon gave a start. Gone? He looked between the two women. What do you mean gone? She's left us. Lydia would not meet her son's gaze. We terminated her employment. Brandon stared, dumbfounded. Don't worry, Lydia soothed, clutching his arm, stroking it with her hand. As I said, she's been replaced. Brandon wrenched his arm away, and when he spoke, it was through clenched teeth. You know nothing of which you speak, mother. The woman gaped at him, stung. Her face went red. She grabbed his arm again. This is inappropriate, she hissed to his under her breath. Then she gave Emma a smile. Brandon, why don't you take Emma inside and get caught up? Brandon turned to Emma, dipping his head formally. I'm sorry, but whatever my mother has told you, promised you, you've been terribly misled. Lydia gasped. Brandon. You have my deepest apologies, Miss Emma, he added, moving past the young girl without a second thought. Emma covered her slack-jawed expression with a delicate hand. Brandon strode into the sitting room, trying to control the anger. Ah, son. His father stood from his chair, setting down his paper and his snifter to come forward and embrace his son. It's good to have you home, he said, clasping his son around the shoulders. At his son's expression, he grew somber. Is something wrong? Maggie. Mother said she's gone. Henry's mustache turned downward. We had to let her go. Helen caught her taking my books, you see. A choked sound worked its way up Brandon's throat. Helen. I should have known. That old bat has had it out for Maggie the minute she started working for this family. I wouldn't be surprised if she framed her. Think of what you're saying, boy. I know what I'm saying. Brandon was nearly shaking, eyes roaming around the sitting room as he tried to think. Maggie is no thief. Where could she have gone? Where did she go? The girl did seem fond of you. Henry moved back toward his armchair, picking up his glass of whiskey. And I of her. More than fond, if you must know. The older man sighed, tipping back the rest of his glass in one fell swoop, grimacing at the burn. I don't know exactly where she's ended up, but I'll tell you this. I referred her to the printers in town. The printers? Your mother made it quite clear. The girl would have no luck finding good work once her reputation was known. I suggested she find a new place for herself, as a mail-order bride out west. Brandon's heart stilled. When he finally found the strength to speak, he uttered, When did she leave? A week or so ago. Perhaps 10 days. She's long gone, boy, you have to accept that. I won't, Brandon clipped, unfurling his jacket once more over his shoulders and shoving his arms through the sleeves. You'd break your mother's heart over some servant girl? She's not some servant girl. He turned on his heel toward the manor's doors. She's my fiancée. Without waiting for a response, he headed straight for the stables. Lydia, who had overheard his last statement, followed after, lamenting his decision like a wailing shadow. "Think of what you're doing," she cried, even as he led a fresh horse out from the stable. "Think of your reputation." Brandon gave no indication that he heard her as he saddled the mare, sinking the belly strap and working in the bit. "Where are you going, Brandon?" "Into town," he said simply, swinging up into the saddle. And then from there, he thought, who knew? But he had to go. He had to try. He kicked the horse, spurring it into action. The beast whinnied and lurched forward, kicking up dust as it barreled down the front drive toward the road, Lydia's shrieks drowned out by thundering hooves. Chapter 6. On her way back to the boarding house that evening, Maggie pulled out the ring from its hidden place around her neck, turning it over in her fingers absently as she walked. She was making it more painful for herself, she knew that. If she were smart, she'd pawn the ring and forget about Brandon altogether. This was her life now. She had to be practical. But why did she resist it so, if it were as certain as all that? Why did she whisper to the ring at night, with the hopes that maybe, just maybe, things would turn out differently? Maybe she was cursed to foolishly hope when it made more sense to let it go. The next week flew by unexpectedly fast. As Sunday approached, Vera led Maggie to her room to try on her old wedding dress, which had been passed down from her mother. "It ain't much," the woman said, stepping back to admire the yellowed lace, tinted with age. "It's fine," Maggie said, twisting where she stood, feeling the fabric sway around her. Vera giggled. "It's much too big for you. I can pin it back. It's very kind of you to let me borrow it." "Oh, hush now." Vera took her by the shoulders. "I know Archie ain't the classiest of men, but we're going to be sisters, you and me. Us girls gotta stick together." Maggie swallowed down a lump in her throat, nodding. Now, that's a pretty trinket." Vera noticed the ring hanging around Maggie's neck, exposed by the lower neckline of the gown. "Oh." Maggie flushed. It was a gift." "That's one mighty fine gift you got there." "Yes," she said softly, caressing the ring with a wistful smile. "Very fine." Before Vera could reply, a quiet rapping on the door made them both turn, breaking the moment. Peeking inside, disheveled and dirty head to toe, Vera's son Max blinked his wide blue eyes up at the women. He was a quiet boy, a bit slow, but that gaze was entrancing. Vera went to crouch next to her son. "What is it, lovey?" Maggie moved back to the cracked vanity. Despite the kindness the other woman had shown her, she suddenly felt like a fraud. Her heart wasn't in it, nor did she hold any affection for the man she'd contracted to marry out of sheer desperation. She fingered the lace along the bodice of the dress. What was Brandon doing now? Had he made it back to the manor after his trip? Would he be angry with Lydia and Helen, or would he simply be resigned to the fact that she was gone? From the very beginning, Maggie had kept little confidence that anything would become of their flirtations, so why then did she feel so robbed? So wronged? "You all right?" At Vera's voice, Maggie realized she'd started tearing up. She sniffed, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry." Don't you fret. I got the same way before my wedding. It's quite a change for a young woman. Now come on, let me wrap this up for you. The men should be needing our help with the inventory." For the rest of the day, Maggie busied herself with fixing up the shop, carting away old, empty cigar boxes and replacing the bare shelves with fresh cartons while Vera scooped loose tobacco into large, glass urns. Arthur helped, to a point, but he soon became bored and slipped out the back door to smoke from his pipe, leaving both women to do the majority of the work. As with the end of most days, Maggie found him once again on the back porch, his favorite spot to hide. "I'm heading out again," she said, staring at the way the afternoon light caught on the glistening sweat upon his balding head with disgusting fascination. "Already? Not helping Vera with dinner tonight?" Maggie sometimes joined the family for dinner, helped with the cooking as best she could, but in the last few days, her appetite had eluded her, I'm quite tired, Maggie said. Arthur stood from his chair, stretching, his shirt riding up on his stomach. He turned around to grin at her, yellow teeth and all. Bet you'd never thought you'd marry a prosperous businessman, did you? Not exactly. He took a step toward her, his eyebrows jumping. Mighty lucky, wouldn't you say? Maggie took a step back, the doorknob pressing into her spine. Quite. He was beginning to invade her personal space. I'm very tired, she said again, hoping he'd leave her be. Haha. That's just the nerves talking about the weddin'. Or should I say, weddin' night? She couldn't help the grimace that passed over her face, but her disgust turned quickly into shock as he reached out to grip her wrist, pulling her toward him. What you lookin' so nervous for? He chuckled, reeking like stale tobacco, a glint of something untoward dancing in his gaze. He reached out to finger the collar of her dress. Let go. She yanked herself away, hard, and before she knew what she was doing, her hand came across the man's plump cheek. The sound of the slap echoed in the stunned silence that followed, and Arthur's demeanor switched from teasing into fury right before her eyes. What d'ya do that for? He roared, nursed his quickly reddening cheek. You out of your mind, woman? Maggie stared at her stinging hand as if it had betrayed her. What had she done? They were to be married in 2 days' time. Was she really expecting him to never touch her? But the thought of letting him, it revolted her. She was so lost in her own head, that she barely felt it when Arthur grabbed her roughly by the shoulder, shaking her as he railed out a string of curses. Was this what it would be like for her? Suppressing her true feelings for the rest of her life? Panic rose like bile in the back of her throat. She didn't love him. She couldn't. With a sharp cry, she shoved with all her strength, sending Arthur stumbling backward. At the same time, the back door opened, Vera poking her head out. What's all this noise? Maggie shook her head violently, trying to regain her senses. Willing herself to move, she whirled around and pushed past the other woman. I can't, she gasped, leaving Arthur and his sister staring after her. I can't do this. I can't. It was a mantra she repeated to herself over and over again as she left the shop in a daze, walking quickly down the road back toward the boarding house, blind to the other townsfolk going about their daily business. She suddenly didn't care if she had no place to go, or if she had no means of income. Anything was preferable to marrying a man she did not love, simply for the convenience of a roof over her head. How could she have been so supremely stupid? Up in her room, she began to throw her things into her carpet bag with renewed determination. Maybe she could get a job as a barmaid. Maybe she could see if the boarding house had need of a washwoman. Maybe she could simply wander out into the wilderness, never to be seen again. A strangled laugh escaped her as she closed her luggage, placing a few coins on the bedside table as payment for the last few additional days. Unwilling to waste any more time lingering about, she hurried down the stairs, wrenching the front door open. To her horror, they were waiting for her. Vera, Noah, and Arthur. Maggie clutched her bag tighter. What do you want? Just where do you think you're going? Arthur sneered at her. I'm leaving, she said, jetting her chin out defiantly. You can't leave. You made a commitment to marry me. I don't care, she replied simply, hoisting her bag higher on her shoulder. I don't care, and I'm leaving. She tried to move past them, but Noah's huge vice-like hand closed around her upper arm, rooting her to the spot. No matter how she struggled, his grip was like iron. Vera came closer, placing a hand upon her shoulder. You'd really leave us? She sounded hurt. Was it something I did? Maggie bit her lip. No, it was. It's not that. I know he's not the best catch in town, Vera said simply. Arthur pouted. Hey. But you've been doing so well at the shop, the woman continued, ignoring her brother. And we've been having a good time together, you and me. Her kind words rang a degree or two hollow, what with her husband holding Maggie back so she wouldn't run off. I know it's a woman's dream to ride off into the sunset with some true love and all that, but we have to be practical, don't we? The shop's been turning a profit for a while now, and I've had no thought of turning you and Archie out on the street. We're family. You can stay with us as long as you want. I could use the help after all. Maggie's bottom lip trembled. Maybe she was being stupid. And ungrateful. Arthur bounced up onto the balls of his feet to insert himself into the conversation, still half a head shorter than all three of them. And I paid for your ticket out here, after all, he added, as if he'd paid for her, like some bag of tobacco. Maggie clenched her jaw. Vera looked toward the sky, shaking her head. Oh, shut it, Archie, why don't ya? Arthur opened his mouth to retort. Now, Vera said to Maggie, why don't we go back inside for the time being? I know it must be hard on ya, not having any family here, and a wedding can be right terrifying if a girl has to go at it alone. I'll stay here with ya and take a break from the shop tomorrow until the preacher comes into town on Sunday. It'll be just us. Maggie's shoulders slumped. You'll be keeping an eye on me, you mean? So, I don't run off again. No, not at all. Vera swatted her husband's hand away, taking Maggie's in her own. I'll have the boys bring the dress over tomorrow so we can get ready. It'll all be all right, you'll see. With a hand pressing on the small of her back, Vera steered Maggie right around, guiding her back into the building. Chapter 7. If Brandon had his way about it, he'd have ridden his horse ragged all the way to Rose Valley. After having needled Maggie's destination from the man at the newspaper, he very nearly did, but common sense eventually got the better of him. Instead, he paid for a train ticket, leaving immediately. The journey was absolute torture. Every moment brought a new unknown gnawing at his brain. Was Maggie all right? Safe and unhurt? Had she made it all the way or had something happened to her? And if she had made it? The thought of some other man taking her hand in marriage nearly drove him insane. He could barely think straight and barely eat. Nor could he find comfort of any kind until the train pulled into the station nearly a week later, early on a damp Sunday morning. He had no bags, nothing but his pocketbook with him. He was tired and disheveled but undaunted. Nearly leaping off the train, he went to work searching the streets, but the town was still sleepy at such an early hour. Few patrons walked the main thoroughfare. Perhaps Maggie wasn't up and about quite yet. If she's even here, said a nasty little voice in the back of his mind. It was quite possible that the town of Rose Valley hadn't been her final destination. He'd found out that there were plenty of cattle ranches and farms a few hours out from the settlement center. It was possible whoever the newspaper had sent her to lived far away. Brandon couldn't give up. He couldn't. He'd just have to make a plan. At the end of the street was a 2-story boarding house. Perfect. He could rent a room should his search take longer than anticipated. He had enough money to sustain him for at least a week or two, and if he couldn't find Maggie by then, well, he wasn't sure what he was going to do after that. Return home? With nothing to show for his outburst? His mother would force him to marry Emma Montgomery for sure. He made his way to the boarding house, head hung. Maybe Maggie wouldn't even want to go back with him. Maybe she was happier here than she'd ever been serving his family. Maybe out here, she felt free. Well, he'd be fine with that, if that's truly what she wanted. He'd have to hear from her mouth before he'd ever believe it was true. Sitting by the window, chin perched up on the palm of her hand, Maggie gazed out over the rooftops toward the mountainous peaks against the skyline. They were so far away. As the dawn broke, she heard Vera stir awake on the bed. The woman sat up, rubbing her eyes. You're already up? Oh yes, Maggie mumbled without turning. I couldn't sleep. Today was the day. She'd be married in just a few hours' time. Vera yawned and stretched. I'll see if I can get us a bite to eat from downstairs. Wait right here a moment. The door clicked as the other woman left the room, just as a train whistle blew in the distance. Maggie turned from the window. The silence that followed Vera's retreat felt heavy and thick in her throat, threatening to choke her. Placed over the front of the room's wardrobe, the dingy little wedding dress hung like a shroud. Dutifully, Maggie changed from her nightgown to the wedding dress, using pins to sync up the dress fabric where it hung off her body. She thought, for a moment, of removing Brandon's ring from around her neck, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. "Ah, you look so pretty." Vera slipped back into the room, clutching a plate of warm cornbread, boiled eggs, and glistening sausages. "Lucky us, this just came out of the kitchen." She smacked her lips. Maggie nibbled on a bit of cornbread and took an offered egg, but she wasn't very hungry. Mainly, she watched Vera eat with her usual vigor. "The boys should be at the chapel soon," the woman said through a bulging mouthful, sweeping crumbs off her lap. "The preacher aims to marry you before the regular service. Should we be off?" Maggie tried to reply, but she could only nod around the knot in her throat, watching Vera pack her things with strange detachment. Exiting onto the landing, they could hear the rest of guests in the boarding house begin to wake and stir with life. Below in the foyer came the murmur of voices, growing clearer as they descend the stairs. "Oh, I do love weddings," Vera tittered, helping to keep Maggie's dress off the floor as they went. "It's been so long since I've been to one." It was all background noise to Maggie, that was, until they reached the ground floor and rounded the bottom of the staircase. She stopped cold. There, at the front desk, speaking with innkeeper was Brandon. He looked up sharply mid-conversation, open-mouthed with shock. Maggie saw his fine vest was splotched with dirt, and his hair was slicked over at an odd angle. His Adam's apple bobbed. "Maggie? Ah, who's that?" Vera asked, but her voice seemed so far away. Maggie tried to shake away the feeling that he couldn't possibly be real, that he was more likely an apparition sent to haunt her for all her misdeeds. What are you doing here?" "I came to." Brandon took a tentative step forward, looking her up and down and taking in the wedding dress. His gaze settled on the ring still hanging around her neck. "I came to bring you home." Tears blurred Maggie's vision. She pressed the heels of her palms to her eyes, holding back choking sobs. "I'm so glad," she managed through her hiccups. "I'm so glad." She reached out to him, and he took little time in crossing the tiny foyer and gathering her up in his arms, holding her to him in a tight hug. "I didn't think I'd find you," he said, pressing his face into her hair, one hand on her back, the other tucked into the curls at the nape of her neck. "When I heard what happened, I was so frightened I'd never see you again." Maggie twisted herself free, her hands hanging in the front of his clothes. "I'm so sorry I didn't wait for you. I didn't think I had a choice." He shook his head. "It doesn't matter now." "Well," a voice behind them said, "looks like we know where that expensive little gift of yours came from now, don't we?" The two of them turned to see Vera at the bottom of the stairs, her arms folded across her chest. She looked resigned. Disappointed. Maggie realized she was still wearing the dress, still on her way to marry Arthur. She blushed. "Vera." The other woman held up a hand. "Ah, you don't have to say nothin'. Haven't seen you look this happy in all the time we've knowed each other." She allowed a small, tired smile. "Just how far did you travel to get here?" "Over a week and thousands of miles," Brandon replied, still gripping Maggie like she'd up and vanish. Vera put a hand over her heart, and her expression softened. My. If that ain't love. Well, we best tell Arthur the news. The boys is sure to be at the chapel waitin' for us." "But the dress," Maggie whispered, as they were waved toward the door. "Keep it for now," Vera said with a wink. "I have a feelin' you'll be needin' it anyway." Chapter 8. When the Vera, Brandon, and Maggie arrived at the chapel, after explaining just who Brandon was, and that there was no way Maggie would be marrying anyone else, Arthur was not happy. He made a particularly embarrassing scene in front of the preacher about the whole thing being an elaborate plot, that he'd been set up from the start. Set up for what, Maggie couldn't begin to imagine. He went at it for a good while until Brandon started waving a few banknotes in his face. Arthur took them begrudgingly, stating loudly that he'd be off nursing his wounded heart with a jug of whiskey. As he stormed out of the chapel, Brandon breathed an audible sigh of relief. Well, Vera said, standing there with her husband and son. Don't see why we should just waste the preacher's time, do ya? Everyone swiveled to look at her. He came all prepared for a wedding, after all. Be ashamed to disappoint him. She beamed at Brandon, who looked downright triumphant. Maggie undid the gold chain around her neck, slipping the ring off and handing it to Brandon. She looked affectionately at Vera and mouthed a thank you. Vera giggled. Later, after the rather rushed ceremony, where it felt like Brandon couldn't get the ring on Maggie's finger fast enough, the two of them sat together on the front steps of the chapel, not an inch of space between them. In their idle, blissful quiet, Brandon held her hand, rolling the pearl ring around her finger absently. What do we do now? Maggie asked, leaning into his shoulder. If we return home, your mother will hate me and might even disown you. But the firm. You have to go back. We've got time to think, he said, bringing up her hand and kissing each finger in turn. I'm a successful young businessman after all. And you're a fiery young woman who tells the best stories. We can do whatever we like, remember? As long as you're with me, I know we'll be fine. Maggie couldn't help the wide smile and bloomed across her face. I dare say I'm inclined to believe you. Brandon chuckled. As you should, Mrs. Jeffries. As you should. The end. Thank you for listening to The Maid Falls in Love by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.